What's up, guys, and welcome back to Moan Inc. If you guys are new here, well then, hello. My name is Erica, and it is a joy to have you joining us today on the channel, because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we're going to be diving into Sav R. Miller's Monsters and Muses series. But before we can get into that, please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you have so kindly joined the nerdy community in this corner of the internet, let's get into the video. Sav R. Miller's Monsters and Muses series is a collection of 6 standalone books in the mafia romance genre that uses Greek mythology to inspire these incredibly dark stories. Now, I initially was alerted to them thanks to Amazon recommending the first book in the series, which is Promises and Pomegranates, to me endlessly before I eventually caved. And let me tell you, I am so glad that I did. So as I said, this series is inspired by Greek myth. But what's really important for you guys to know is that at the start of each and every one of these books, Sav does have a disclaimer which states that these are not retellings, these are not reimaginings, they're not fantasy, none of that, okay? The Greek gods are not mentioned, the characters from myth are not mentioned, and all of this is really just used to infuse and elevate her mafia romance stories as their own, okay? So we've got different names, we've got different characters, they're set in the modern world, so there's no magic, no fantasy elements, nothing. And Sav does make this incredibly clear from page 1. But you're probably wondering, what are each of the books based on? Book number 1 is Promises and Pomegranates, which is inspired by Hades and Persephone. Book 2, Vipers and Virtuosos, inspired by Orpheus and Eurydice. Book 3, Oaths and Omissions, inspired by Helen of Troy or Helen of Sparta, depending on which version you want to say. Book 4, which is Arrows and Apologies, is inspired by Apollo and Daphne. Book 5, which I don't have because I've currently lent it to a friend of mine to read, is titled Souls and Sorrows and is inspired by Eros and Psyche. And lastly, Book 6, which is the newly released Liars and Liaisons, is inspired by the myths of Pan and Echo. Now, along with all of those, there is a novella, which technically is the prequel to Promises and Pomegranates, and that's called Sweet Sin. But this does not claim to be regarding Greek myth, inspired by Greek myth at all, and it certainly isn't. It's just a bit of a precursor to this book. So I do have this physical copy, but if you guys pick this up because, you know, whatever website you go on to order this from, I do have the Amazon links in the description below if you guys want to just, you know, hop on over there. I am sure that this will get recommended, but this is not advertised as being inspired by Greek myth, and I do just want to point that out to you guys. So we're not discussing you today. For you guys who frequent the channel, you will know that my perspective on books and on authors who take the myths and they run with them, whether it be inspiration, rewritings, reimaginings, whatever it is, I always think it's very good to read. And I don't care what people are reading so long as they're reading. So I do just want to open this video by saying that before I get into my personal opinions, that regardless of whatever you're reading, do not let anybody shame you. Do not let anybody tell you that that's not real reading, whatever it is that people want to say. If it's a book, if there are words on a page, you're reading, and that still counts. And that's still unbelievably important. My only issue tends to be when people mismarket their books. So when I see books that say this is a retelling of X or this is a reimagining of Y, and I don't see any of that in the book, then I will always voice that, and I will always make a point to tell you guys that it's not a retelling, it's not a reimagining, this is not the myth, and you can't learn from it. But that doesn't mean that I'm discrediting the book as reading, because hey, I sat down and I read it. So I think that's always incredibly important to highlight before I go into all of my opinions. But if you guys had different opinions throughout as you guys are watching this video, then do leave them in the comments, because I would be really interested to see if you guys thought any differently about the Monsters and Muses series or about the individual books as we get into them. Let's start with the first 2 books in the series. Okay, so we have Promises and Pomegranates, which was Hades and Persephone, and we have Vipers and Virtuosos, which is Orpheus and Eurydice. At the start of both of these books, we do have the disclaimer that these are not retellings, not reimaginings. It's merely the myth inspiring each of these books. And in this book, when we meet our Hades and Persephone, we have Elena and Cal. So those are their names. This whole series is set in like modern day Boston or on the island next to Boston, I think it is. I'm not really good with this geography of the mafia places, but I'm pretty sure it's all like New England sort of area. That's where this one is set. Those are our two characters. This one actually starts off in New York, even though the connections between these two families are still in New England, that this is actually starts off in New York. We meet the musician Aidan James, and his Eurydice is a character called Riley. Now, both of these books, I do just want to make this clear right from the get-go, actually should have been marketed as retellings. I loved them. I was so pleasantly surprised by the stories that were told and the fact that both of them really matched the mythology. Of course, we're in a totally different genre, so both of these are incredibly dark. I mean, there are things that happen, particularly in Vipers and Virtuosos, where I have never been more scared for a character in my whole life. But the stories themselves are beat for beat exactly what we see in the Greek myth. You know, when it comes to Hades and Persephone, when it comes to Promises and Pomegranates, this is one of the only retellings that I have ever read that doesn't shy away from the dark elements of that true mythology that we see in the Homeric hymns and referenced in other places as well, whether it be art or whatever it is. You know, this story is about abduction, right? This story of Hades and Persephone is non-consensual. Persephone screams and she cries, and this is a really traumatic experience for her. Hades is manipulative in that myth, and that's really important to highlight, and that's something that's highlighted in this book, which I loved that she didn't shy away from that. I love that she gave us beat for beat, you know, her father setting up this marriage for her, her having no say in it, her mother having no say in it, the fact that our Hades character, who's Cal, picks her up and takes her away to his metaphorical underworld. Obviously, there's not a real underworld, but that was so incredibly done and so creatively done that I will always hold Promises and Pomegranates, I think, on a pedestal in the same way that I will do with Vipers and Virtuosos, because even though, again, yes, we don't actually have a trip to the underworld that Orpheus does to go and pick up the soul of the woman that he loves, we have Aidan James, who, when Riley has this metaphorical death, I'm not going to ruin anything for you guys, I swear, but when she has a metaphorical death, we have Aidan James go to find her, and we have Aidan James try to bring her back to reality and to his version of reality, and how that plays out is utterly terrifying, but it is beat for beat the myth. It's just, you know, sort of warped and changed to match the genre, and that was really, really cool to read. Conversely to that, though, books 3 and book 4, so those, just to remind you guys, are Oaths and Omissions and Arrows and Apologies. Oaths and Omissions being inspired by Helen of Troy and Helen of Sparta, and this one by Apollo and Daphne. I think they were marketed correctly, right? I think that there were clear glimmers of the mythology in both of these, but it wasn't strong enough that I would have ever said it was a reimagining. I would have ever said that it was a retelling. Like, you know, in this one, sure, the character who is our Helen, technically, her name's Lenny, she's fought over by 2 men, and the foreign guy ends up winning, and she ends up falling in love with him and sort of running off with him. Which, like, yeah, I guess. But in the way that she marketed this in the start, saying it's just inspired by, it didn't bother me, because I knew that I wasn't there to actually read, you know, between Helen of Sparta picking Menelaus and Paris. It was actually, I was reading a mafia romance book, and I saw little glimmers of the myth, but it certainly was marketed correctly, and it's not going to tell you the myth itself, which is fine. It's fine because it is perfectly marketed, and I massively appreciate that. In the same way that Arrows and Apologies, inspired by Apollo and Daphne, I mean, we get like one scene where they run through the forest, and where the guy who's our Apollo in that scene is like yelling after the girl, and that's it. Like, literally, that's it. The rest of the story is just pure mafia romance. That does pop up in it, and obviously that's important to highlight that, yes, I saw Apollo and Daphne somewhere in it, but it wasn't the story as a whole. It didn't actually contribute to the story as a whole. The tale that's told in this is completely different, and that's okay, because again, it was correctly marketed. Book 5, which I don't have, which is Souls and Sorrows, is actually a completely different case from the previous 4 that I've discussed, right? So we start off with the first 2 that I think could have been marketed as retellings, and I would have been very happy with that. Then we've got books 3 and book 4, which I think were marketed correctly as just mere, you know, sort of infused slightly with the Greek mythology. And when it comes to book 5, Souls and Sorrows as Eros and Psyche could have been marketed, in my opinion, as a reimagining. because the way that Sav R. Miller took that myth and applied it to not only the modern world, but also to mafia romance, I think the changes that were made were necessary. So if you guys know the myth of Eros and Psyche, you might not. I'm not going to tell you the whole myth, but there's a certain element to it where Psyche doesn't know who she's married to, right? So she doesn't know that she's married to Eros, and there's this whole sort of back and forth between her and her sisters telling her that she's got to like break into the room at night and see who her husband is, and you never know if it's a monster and all of this sort of stuff. That doesn't happen in Souls and Sorrows. That our main character does know who she's married to, except the way that Sav has kind of changed that is that she just doesn't see her husband ever, really, right? So like their schedules are totally opposite. She leaves before he wakes up or after he wakes up. I can't actually remember, but she basically, they don't cross paths. And so there are a number of things that happen like that throughout the book that even though they're not specifically from the Greek myth, they have been adapted and they have changed in order to fit this genre and in order to fit this world. So that's a reimagining, right? That's what a reimagining does, is it takes the framework and it adapts and it changes it. So I think that could have been marketed as a reimagining, and I would have been, again, like quite happy with that. Now, the last book in the series is a little bit of an odd one, and that's because Liars and Liaisons is inspired by the myths of Pan and Echo. And when I tell you guys we're dealing with like 1 or 2 lines from the source material, I genuinely mean that we're dealing with 1 or 2 lines from the source material. And when I was reading this book, what really stuck out to me, or at least what I assume, is that actually Sav knew exactly what was going to happen in this book. She knew what was going to happen with the characters. I'm actually chatting to her in a few days, so I'll see if this comes up. I don't know when this video comes out. If my interview with Sav is out, I'll be linking that in the description below, so you guys can go and watch that. But I assume with this book, she knew the story already. And then she remembered that this is a series inspired by Greek myth and was like, oh no, now what? And so she ended up just picking these really like odd lines, basically this really odd mythology to try and apply to a book when it wasn't actually really needed. And so I actually think that this was the book that was marketed correctly as well. Just given that the mythology is so odd and so bizarre and so minimal, that it was clear to me that she knew what was happening in these books. And, well, particularly in this one, she knew what was going to happen. And she just had to find something that was like general or minimal enough that she could say, yeah, it's totally inspired by Pan and Echo. I mean, you know, like the characters are alone in the forest and there are like these crazy parties in the forest, which I guess is kind of reminiscent of Pan, I guess. But like not overly that I was, you know, I could identify it. If she hadn't written that, I would have had zero idea what she was talking about. When it comes to my opinions of did I enjoy the books, I need you guys to know that I don't read mafia romance, and I don't think that this series will make me a mafia romance reader. I was certainly more scared than I was anything for any of these characters, but I did enjoy them. I really enjoyed them, and I loved seeing Greek myth adapted to a genre that I didn't expect it could be. It's a genre I actually didn't really know existed, and the fact that it is such a popular genre and that Greek mythology can still work with it, I thought was so fun and so entertaining and such a good, easy read. You know, like they're not mentally taxing books. They're really fast to read and they are enjoyable in that sense. So I did really enjoy them. Do I think you can learn from the mythology? Obviously, only the first 2 will really help you. And I think book 5 will help you. But aside from that, you know, if you go into this series because you like mafia romance, again, as I said at the start, don't let anyone tell you that that's not really reading. Don't let anyone try and shame you for that, because these books are, I think, for people who like that genre and who don't really know Greek myth, these books are a great way of getting into Greek myth in a genre that you already like and in a way that's already familiar to you. So as I said, I have linked all the books in the description below. I would definitely recommend them for any of you guys in that particular genre. And of course, I would absolutely recommend that you guys listen to my chat with Sav, which I'll be having in a few days, but will be linked down there as soon as that video comes out, because I am so excited to chat with her and to chat with somebody who clearly likes Greek mythology and who clearly appreciates Greek mythology, but was so unafraid to be unbelievably creative and brave by publishing these books in this specific genre. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you guys have any other opinions of the Monsters and Muses series, do leave them down in the comments below. Engage with the community. Let's have a little bit of a chit chat. I will be checking down there every so often so that I can keep on top of all of those. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on Moan Inc. I'll see you guys then.